I'm watching the greatest scam in the history of collector cars go down. And this is priceless. I'm talking about the Black Ghost Challenger, which just sold for $1 million. Meckham auction, night before last. $1 million. It's a scam. And why do I say this is a scam? All right, I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to give you any speculation at all. I'm just going to lay out facts, just facts, and then you guys can make your decision as to whether or not it's a scam. But I'm getting the biggest kick out of this because I see the bigger picture, and nobody else has seen the bigger picture yet. And I'm going to tell you what it is at the end of this. All right. So over the last couple of years, people have been asking me, oh, what about the Black Ghost Challenger? Have you ever heard of the Black Ghost? Right? And I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to say anything derogatory or negative. I didn't want to seem like, all right. But I became aware of this Black Ghost Challenger. This was 3 years ago now. I was at Carlisle, and the car was on display. And I had never heard of it, which, if the car actually did have any sort of provenance, I would have heard about it. Right? And I'll get to that too. So I see this car on display. It's a Roche Survivor 70 Hemi Challenger. And the thing that caught my eye about it was that it's got a gator green top. And I'm a bug for gator green, right? So I walked over and I'm looking the car over. And it's Roche. And I look at the sign and it says, Black Ghost Challenger, legendary street race car. All right. So I'm looking the car over and I'm like, this is not a street race car. Okay, this is not a Detroit street race car. This is a completely bone stock 1970 Hemi Challenger RTSE. Not a street race car. So as I'm looking the car over, I see that it says it's got 45,000 miles on it. And I'm like, ooh, I know what a 45,000 mile car looks like. This is 145,000. This thing was rode hard and put away wet. Because the car was just, well, it had the patina of, a 145,000 mile car. But that's only speculation. Let's call it 45,000. All right. So as I'm looking the car over, I'm seeing it, well, yeah, it's definitely all stock. The battery is still under the hood. It has a sway bar under the front of it. It's got power steering. It's optioned to the max. Like if you could click off the box, everything. You name it, this car had it, which is impressive by itself. But street race car? So as I'm looking the car over, the owner comes over, Gregory Qualls. So now Greg seemed like a nice guy, and he doesn't know me from a hole in the wall. And I'm just looking the car over, and he's like, and he strikes up a conversation, and we're talking back and forth, and he tells me it was his father's car, and it was a legend in Detroit called the Black Ghost, and that his father used to sneak this thing out every once in a while on Woodward Avenue and go street race it and then disappear. And people called it the Ghost because it was just disappear. And at this point, now I'm talking to this guy and I'm biting my tongue, right? Because you know what? And his father had passed and his father gave him the car. I got the whole story from him, right? But I'm biting my tongue now because I happen to be familiar with the street race scene in Detroit from that era. I wasn't there, but I all right. So I don't have the heart to tell this kid, hey, I don't know what story your old man told or what you heard or anything like that, but this is like a 14-second car. I mean, on a good day, this is a 14-second car. This is a nose-heavy, Dodge Challenger. It's a 4,000-pound car with a completely stock engine, completely stock everything. And there's just no way that this thing ever, quote, even held its own on Woodward Avenue or any street race scene in that era. All right. So let's start with the origin of this and the car's purchase and the car's original owner, Gregory's father, Godfrey Qualls, who, by all accounts and everything that I can determine, was an extraordinary human being. He served his country. He was a paratrooper. He got the Purple Heart. He became a Green Beret. In between, he served his community. He was a Detroit motorcycle cop, 27 years on the job. He was obviously a hardworking, a good person, like literally. Now, again, this is only what I can determine. I can't speak for the guy's actual character, but he seems like he was a complete stand-up, honorable guy in every respect, and he seemed to be a good father and grandfather. So this is by no means in any way disparaging Mr. Qualls, Officer Qualls' name or reputation. It's what happened afterwards. So he had a couple of bouts with cancer. In 2015, he knew his time was up, and he flipped the title to the car to Gregory, his son. Never telling Greg, oddly enough, that the car had a Detroit street racing history, that it was the Black Ghost. It was just, no, this is my car, man, and it meant a lot to me, and I want you to have it now. That was it. That was the sum total of it. So Mr. Qualls never claimed to be this outlaw underground street racer. Okay, he was just a guy who bought this car. He wanted the best of the best, and he got the best of the best. He checked off every box, and the car that he got is really amazing in its own right as a triple black RT SE 70 Hemi Challenger 4-speed. It hits all, it rings all the bells. All right. But never anything about this car's, quote, street racing history. It only came about afterwards that people would tell Gregory about his father's exploits on Woodward Avenue and the Detroit area, and how this thing was a legendary street racer. All right. So now what we have here is we have a completely bone stock 14-second, on a good day, 70 Hemi Challenger that was supposed to own, it was supposed to be this mysterious legendary street racer from Detroit. All right, so there were many, many fast cars, very many known cars that raced Detroit in that era. And supposedly the Black Ghost was in action between 1970 and 1975. All right, so let's look at two cars that bookended the career of the Black Ghost. So the Silver Bullet. The Silver Bullet in 1970 was the car. It was a backdoor Chrysler engineering effort project, okay? So the same stuff that they were developing for direct connection and the Pro Stock program of the day and everything else, all of the technology went to the Silver Bullet, and the Silver Bullet was out there on the streets. The Silver Bullet was a legitimate 10-second streetcar. Quiet, through the mufflers, 10-second streetcar in 1970. That was hauling bananas, right? And I had the privilege of examining the Silver Bullet. This is back in the 1980s when I was the editor of Mopar Action magazine. I had the privilege of examining the Silver Bullet as it was last raced. So its last race was sometime in the middle to early 1970s, 72, 73, something like that. And then the car was just pulled out of service, and it was stuck in a garage. And I actually got to climb all over that car and look at every little nook and cranny of it back during that period of time. So it's a car I'm familiar with. 1970, 71. So now let's go to the other end of the Black Ghost's career, 1975. And the car to beat at that period of time in Detroit was the Gap and Roush built Sudden Death Mustang. Yes, Gap and Roush, right? The Pro Stock people. They built this car called Sudden Death. And it owned the streets for a period of time around 1975. It was a legit single-digit car. It was a Pro Stock car. This is what they were racing in Detroit during that period of time, between 1970 and 1975. Now, there were countless other cars that would fit into this, but I'm only using those two examples to bookend the career of the supposed career of the Black Ghost. So, make a long story short, it's a great story. It's a great story, and it takes on a life of its own, and it has people who are helping to perpetrate the story. Haggerty's is all over this now. Okay, they're promoting the Black Ghost, the Black Ghost, the Black Ghost. They're making all these little short films and documentaries and things like that. The Black Ghost. What a great story. But the car itself contradicts the story. The evidence, you don't need any evidence that this story is made up other than the fact that just look at the car. It is a bone stock car. It doesn't even have headers on it. It's got the battery still under the hood. Like nothing was ever done to this car to make it any faster than it would have been in a 14-second range. If it did ever race on Woodward Avenue or in that area in general, yes, I mean, I'm sure it did. Every muscle car of the era did. But if it did race and it did beat anything, it was going to be like a 396 Chevelle with a power glide. Yes, okay, the Black Ghost is going to run away and hide from this thing. Hardly the stuff that legends are made of. But it is the stuff that great stories are made of. And the great story isn't over yet. Because the scam has only really just begun. In fact, the whole auction, the Meckham thing, I believe also is a scam. So, and I'll get to that in just 1 minute. So, like I said, I looked over the car. I talked to the guy Greg, and I didn't have the heart to tell him, no, just this is no way. Okay, it's a great story you have here, but that's all it is. It's a story. This car never owned anything. It was never feared by anybody at any time. This was your dad's car. It was his pride and joy. He drove it to and from work and wherever he would drive it, and I could see where he would love this car, and you should love it too, But this story you're making up, man, it's a little over the top. All right, so it sells for $1 million. So you have to have a bunch of hype. Even Dodge gets into the act. They do a Black Ghost edition of the Challenger, right? The new Hellcat, right? A Black Ghost edition of this thing. It ends up in the National Historic Registry for cars. Like this is like crazy next level stuff. And as it's happening, right, like I'm not really paying attention to it because I got other fish to fry. I got other things going on. I really don't care what's happening with this car, but I know that it's all a scam. And so it finally sells for $1 million. $975 was the hammer price. I think the total was $1,072,000. Don't quote me on it. It's $1 million. I'm not here looking at it. It's $1 million. And I'm like, this is just ridiculous. It's like, what kind of idiot would spend this kind of money without actually looking at the car and putting two and two together and say, this is a 14-second car. This is a bone stock 14-second car. The story that goes with it is obviously nonsense. But then, if you do just a little bit of research, you dig just a little bit under the surface, then it gets really interesting, okay? Because forget about the car and this and the what it is, and let's talk about the actual story, and let's talk about who's telling the story. Gregory Qualls, Godfrey's son. So Greg, and this has never been mentioned or talked about or anything like that, Greg is actually a cinematographer. He's a filmmaker. He's a filmmaker, okay? And just a tiny bit of research, tiny bit, like literally, okay? Like a 30-second Google search turns up the fact that he owns a company called Full View Productions, visual content creators, okay? And it's a very nice website, very high end. And here's a mission statement. About us. Just so you know, I'm not making this up. I'll read it to you. About us. Our goal is to be mission-driven storytellers who pioneer authentic, state-of-the-art visual content with the goal to invoke an emotional response. We are a diverse collective of creatives, visionaries, and artists ready to capture the most compelling stories that focus on impact. Oh, wait a minute. You mean that you have this unbelievable story about a decorated, war hero who buys this car and then sneaks out at night and owns, the Detroit street racing scene, and then disappears mysteriously like the Black Ghost, and then leaves the car to his son on his deathbed, and then the car becomes world famous and sells for $1 million at this giant auction. You mean a story like that? Is that the kind of stories you make, the kind of films that you make? Well, it's the kind of story that becomes a feature-length movie, a full-length movie. And I've even seen the trailer for it. There's a trailer for it. Look it up on YouTube, all right? There's a trailer for the Black Ghost movie. I believe it's MGM Studios. And it's the story of Godfrey Qualls and his military career and his police career and his family life and all this other stuff. And then they get into the car. And what better way to end that movie? What better Cinderella ending to a movie like that after he's dead, he's remembered and as a secretive underground street racer, and his car sells for $1 million at this auction. You couldn't make this stuff up. I couldn't make this stuff up. I'm not creative enough to make stuff like this up. It actually happened. Do not take my word on any of this. If everything else I'm saying is I'm just making this up, right? Just look at the car itself. It is a bone stock 1970 Hemi Challenger. It is a 14-second car. It didn't own any street racing anywhere on Earth in the 1970s, early 1970s. That fact alone. But now, like I said, you start to look at the background, creative filmmaker, compelling stories, you got it. I mean, that's about it. And I personally think, just my opinion, was that the thing with Meckham, that Meckham is maybe in, okay, no, I'm not even going to say that. I won't say that because that's just wrong. I have doubts as to the actual credibility of the auction, of the bidders, whoever bid on this car. I don't think it was just two idiots with more money than common sense bidding this thing up. I think it was at this world famous auction for top of the line money, and everybody along the line, like I said, Meckham and Haggerty's and just every and Dodge, every person who this car, they've all played it up to the max. They've, in my opinion, this is the greatest scam in the history of collector cars, and it hasn't even really gotten going yet. Wait until the movie comes out. It's priceless. I wish I could make stuff like this up. I can't, right? I'd be a multi-millionaire. I'll see you tomorrow.